Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Farmers Weekly's Level the Field webinar on women and farming succession. I'm Susie Horn, Farmers Weekly's business editor. I grew up on farms in East Yorkshire and North Yorkshire, where both my brothers are farming, one arable, one mainly sheep. The Level the Field campaign was started last year by our deputy editor, Abby Kay, and it's about making agriculture fairer, more equitable and inviting for everyone. And last year, in its first year, it focused on improving opportunity and inclusivity for women. So this webinar is part of that initiative. And then this year, the campaign focuses on neurodiversity. And we have several sponsors, same as last year: Frontier, Lantra, Defra, Arla, and executive recruiter DeLacy. Level the Field's also supported by Leaf, Tier, Farming Community Network, and the CLA. So thanks to all of those for their support. So back to women and farming succession. Tonight is about what's best for the farming business and for the people involved. So thank you for joining the webinar, and to all of our panel for their time and expertise. We are waiting for Victoria Vivian of the CLA to join us as well. So hopefully she'll be with us soon. So the succession debate obviously has been driven up at least a couple of gears by last October's budget. And much of the advice that is being sought by farming families is relevant no matter what the gender of the person. But there's no denying that while attitudes have changed to women succeeding to and running farming businesses and owning farms, there are still a few blocks, even though women often drive a lot of the decisions, even when they're not the principal or the owner. So in the professions advising farmers, mainly lawyers, we have a lawyer on the panel, accountants, we also have an accountant, consultants and land agents. It's really noticeable, however, the last 30 years, the proportion of women advisors helping farming businesses has really grown a lot. So farming's perhaps got a little bit of catching up to do in that sense. We've got 4 really good panelists tonight. I'll introduce them very briefly, and then they'll each have a few minutes to talk about their own farming succession where that's appropriate. And some of them, particularly Julie and Jeanette, spend a lot of their working time advising farming families on how to develop a succession plan. And so they'll talk about that and answer the questions, particularly with women in mind. After that, we go to some of the questions that have been submitted in advance and those that come in during the session. So first of all, if Julie could speak first. Julie Butler is founding partner of Hampshire Accountant Butler & Co, and she's also a farmer. Julie and our next panelist, lawyer Jeanette Dennis of Ashton's Legal, have both got many years' experience advising farming families on business structures and succession. Jeanette also farms in partnership with her sister and her father in Norfolk. Megan Townley is our 4th panelist. Megan is Wildflower Seed Development Manager for Wiltshire-based Bright Seeds. She also helps her grandparents with their farm, where the succession discussion's been rumbling for some time. We also have, hopefully, Victoria Vivian joining us, as I think I mentioned, who's currently president of the CLA and also manages quite a diversified farming business in Cornwall. So if you're watching and you want to ask a question at any time, there's a box, or there should be a box at the foot of your screen. If you type in your question, and I'll direct them to the panel. So we've got a lot of expertise on the panel tonight. Please make use of it. And we've also had quite a few advanced questions, and we get a lot during the webinar. So apologies to anyone whose questions we don't manage to get to. I'm going to concentrate on those that involve women particularly, but really, a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about tonight, gender is not a part of it. There'll be general succession questions as well. The webinar will last for about an hour and a quarter and will be available on demand afterwards tomorrow. If you've registered, you'll get an email to let you know when that recording is ready for viewing. So we'll go straight to our first speaker, which will be Julie. Julie, if you could tell us a little bit about your own farming situation and then about some of the issues that you see when you're advising farming families, particularly with women and succession in mind. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Susie. Yes, so yes, I'm. My late husband was a dairy farmer, had farmed all his life. The farm had been in the family for 100 100 years. I also inherited a small farm from my godfather, which is a large amount of woodland, and I've done a lot of diversification in there, which is quite time consuming, to say the least. So I started up an accountancy practice which focused on farming. Written a number of farm tax books, tax planning for farm and land diversification. Just thought I'd hold up one edition there. I think we're now our 10th edition, because the Institute of Chartered Accountants access it online, so they want it updated all the time. So that's very good, as they pay me to update it. I think when I first wrote it, I had to buy 200 copies, and they went in my mum's attic or something, I think. Anyway, I also write Butler's Equine Tax Planning. There we are. So in starting the practice, we have seen a lot of situations where there are problems with the female of the species in the farming situation. I personally feel that this budget has opened up the thoughts on succession planning. What I found very, very good since the 30th of October is that in meetings with farmers, they're actually focused, and that surviving spouse remains. And so the relief for the surviving spouse remains. So bringing the spouse and the spouses of the younger partners as well into the arrangements is very efficient. So the budget is a marvelous opportunity to really have the farmers focused, and have them focused on the role of the spouse. So over to you, Jeanette.
Right. Yeah. Jeanette next. Thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Susie. Thank you, Julie. So I'm a farmer's daughter from Norfolk, one of 3 girls, and my father didn't inherit his farm. He started up from scratch, and we were pig farmers primarily, up to 4,000 at one stage, intensive, started extensive, went intensive, then extensive. And we started with a holding of 197 acres. And I know that because I registered it for IAX, I'm showing my age, in 1991, driving around and doing all the maps. And effectively, farming has been under my fingernails all my life. And from my point of view, it's actually more about working hard and being, I think, putting the hours in as well. And I think that's often, I mean, I don't want to go down necessarily a gender division, but I think also it is about being committed. Farming is a 24/7, particularly livestock game. We've now got just under 500 acres, and I farm in partnership with my father and sister, and we lost my mother at the beginning of COVID. So there's the 3 of us. And then last year, prior to the budget, my father transferred the farms to my sister and I, but they remain a partnership asset. And also they're confirmed within a declaration of trust, which Julie will be delighted to hear about. And also every field and land registry title is detailed in the account. So I have done what I get my clients to on succession planning, which is written partnership agreement, declaration of trust, and the partner's property account in the accounts. Can't stress enough the importance of a written partnership agreement. Yesterday, I was flying back from seeing my dad in Spain. I got a message from clients who have been in partnership with their parents since the 70s. One of the partners has just died. The funeral is imminent, and the bank was threatening to freeze the farm account because the bank didn't have a copy of the partnership agreement. And that bank is a high street main lender for agriculture. And it's been interesting. I think farmers sort of are slightly in denial about the need for a written partnership agreement. But if you get one thing out of this webinar, please do a written partnership agreement, because we saved that whole business being frozen by sending over a copy of the partnership agreement, which we had done, and we've done all the other stuff. Is that enough from me? Over to Megan, maybe?
Yeah, okay. Good evening, everybody. So my story is a little bit closer on the timeline. I am still starting out in my career within the industry. The family farming aspect comes from my grandparents. So my grandfather has got a 180 odd acre farm in Hampshire, where I currently live. I followed his footsteps with a degree in agriculture at Harper Adams, and sort of developed my career going down that route. I didn't grow up on the farm, but I have since moved here about 3.5 years ago now. And with the decline in his health, I've been getting more actively involved. So we are primarily a mixture of arable, and then we've got a livery business. So I do a lot of work with that, and also a small shoot that I sort of run. So as his health has been declining, I've been picking up in my contributions towards the farm and what have you. But obviously he's in his later 80s now, and the succession planning conversations have been had. There's a partnership agreement that was made about 10 years ago, which brought my mum and my uncle partners into the business. And then I think it never quite got sort of discussed further since then. And obviously with the budget back in October, that really encouraged our conversations. It's a topic I've been trying to have for about 2 years now, because of the two generations below. I'm sort of the main person that's followed in the farming footsteps, and I would love the opportunity to spend my life running this farm, but we are still in the early sort of stages of those conversations. So this webinar will be as helpful for me as many others, I'm sure.
Okay. That's great. Thank you very much, Megan. So we're still waiting for Victoria to join. Hopefully we will get her, but I think to sort of get on with things, we'll go into some of the questions. So as I think I might have mentioned, some of them are quite generic, and it wouldn't make a difference what the gender of the person involved is, and who might be wanting to succeed or planning to succeed. So to kick off with our first one. It's about not having an obvious successor. And I think, we do a London Farms page every week in Farmers Weekly, which just looks at farms that are just launching or about to launch for sale. And increasingly over the last, probably 23 and 2024, we had an increasing, we always ask reason for sale, and sometimes it's personal and people don't want to say, but increasingly it's been noticeable that not having a successor, or not having a successor who's wanting to take the farm on practically, was an increasing reason for those sales. I don't know whether Julie and Jeanette would agree that that's been increasingly the case. Yeah,
agree entirely with that. Yes.
Yeah, right.
I think also it's a question of starting that discussion sooner rather than later, because what you identify as, say, a blood relation as a successor, you don't need to stop at that. You can look at other people as well.
Yeah.
And I have seen some people name successors or talk to successors who aren't direct bloodline relatives, or go with siblings, families as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So the question is, they would like advice when there are 2 daughters and 1 son. The son's tried farming, but has now left the farm for a city job, and there's a slim chance of him returning. What plans should be put in place now that there isn't an obvious successor? So I guess that's in assuming it's an owned farm, but it's a case of where do the assets go, and then how do you farm it to keep the farm going, if that is what is desired. I think we have to assume it is, because obviously selling up and passing on the cash is the other option. Shall we go to Julie?
Yes. So, Susie, can I ask a point there? It says advice when there is 2 daughters and 1 son. The son's gone.
Yeah.
Well, why aren't the 2 daughters going to take it on? It doesn't actually say there what
No,
the
but
2
I think
taking it on. Because
so we could read that.
In today's world, in these sort of examples, is it either is the 2 girls or one of the girls does take it on and does do that very well, and bring to the table a lot of administration skills that others might not have, and also I've recently been an executor of of a farm where the two siblings did not want to take on the farm, and it was lotted in actual fact, because it was so beautiful and so easy to make vast amounts of money by breaking it all up. But so my question would be is, why are the two daughters not taking it on?
Yeah.
Or do we know that?
Well, we can do two things. We can assume the daughters don't want to take it on, but because the question is saying now there isn't an obvious successor, it could mean that they want the farm business to continue, or it could mean that, what should we do now? Nobody's interested. But I guess that's a fairly stark solution.
Yes.
So if assuming they want the farm business to carry on, what would you advise there?
I would advise, just on the fact that there's been a little bit of a misunderstanding just in working out who really wants what. I would suggest a family meeting where everyone is honest and open about what they do want. I know in Farmers Weekly you often promote what's known as the family farming charter, where each of the family put down what they would like, and try and find out really if they are going to take it on, and if they want to sell it and they have to sell it, then to be honest and open about that. Because then I think I would advise them going to see land agents at a very early stage to look at a property strategy and how they would approach selling it in the market. And the capital gains tax rate didn't go up in the budget, so that it can be said that if they really don't want to carry on farming, then to think about selling, but as a strategy with a land agent, really trying to understand where the market is, what the tax rates are, and what the exact position would be.
Okay, and I presume, well, I don't want to tread on Jeanette's toes, but I'll leave it to you, Jeanette, because I was thinking contract farming agreements and tenancies and so on. So
exactly, Susie. So I think, Julie, I would start slightly differently. I would ask for a meeting with all the respective generations that are going to be involved. So not just the two daughters and the son, but we don't know the age group. It could be that there are children, in inverted commas, who are in their 40s. So I think I'd like to get everybody around the table. I agree with that. But actually, as a solicitor, I work always very closely with accountants. So my initial meeting would be to get everybody in a room, but beforehand to ask for three things. One is a copy of the latest available sets of accounts. The second is a plan of the area which they own or farm. So if they are contracting for other people, to mark the appropriate fields differently on the RPA maps. I'm happy to work with RPA maps. The reason we do that is we run an AI program to see who owns what at that stage. And we ask for the accounts because we want to see in the partnership accounts who are the partners. I know that sounds silly, but I've had cases where people have said, I'm not in partnership with him. And actually, she is. And it's been returned to HMRC for years on that basis. And a third document is a copy of the partnership agreement. So using AI, I would pull up who owns what if it's registered land. If it isn't, if I'm faced with big white spaces, that's a to-do list immediately, because they need to get clear who owns what and where the title deeds are. I know that sounds pretty basic, but then having got everybody in the room, I think I would open a discussion as, what do you want to do? Because if in fact nobody wants to carry on farm, ultimately that is a sales situation. But actually, if people aren't sure, if there is enough income being generated for the people who need the income, and I put it like that, then we would look at working with the accountant. But also I'd like to look at what's the current tax position, and the elephant in the room in all this discussion today is the budget. I'd like to know what the current tax position is for inheritance tax and capital gains tax. So this comes back to, is the property in the partnership. There are incredibly favourable tax regime benefits from having property in a partnership, but you need to evidence it. And then I think I'd ask the accountant to run the figures as to what, if there's no changes in the budget proposals, what the new tax bill is going to look like. And then as a family, they can decide whether between those two, they actually want to do anything. And it could be that the non-farming siblings actually, like me, could be farming as well as doing a separate day job. And I came in as a 2.5% partner, Susie, into our farm partnership. So did my sister. That's just profit and loss. We weren't given anything. So there are ways of using partnerships are very flexible for that type of succession planning.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? That you don't have to gift land and other assets to bring someone into a partnership. Yeah.
I normally draw 2 circles in a meeting. So many people see me do this. So circle partnership, circle land, and the 2 are separate. You can carve the land in a different way to the partnership. But round the 2, you've actually got the commitment of the land ownership into the partnership. And that's what I do on a declaration of trust.
Right. Megan, inevitably, a lot of these questions are going to need a sort of legal or a tax answer. So I'm not necessarily going to bring them all to you, but just thinking about your situation and people of your age and ambition, I guess the answer from you would be, well, give someone a chance to farm it.
Yes, exactly. So sort of as Jeanette was describing, the stage of everyone into a room and then sort of discuss what everybody wants from it and then go to the accountant. We're at that stage. So we started around 18 months ago, bring everyone into a room, which was interesting. It's all very, there's always a lot of emotion involved. And I personally, from someone who's, so at the minute, I'm not in the partnership at all. I have no legal or sort of financial stake in the business currently, just an emotional and personal one. And that has been challenging to have those conversations, but I was desperate to have them because at this point in my life, it's my future. And so we've had those conversations and we ended up getting a mediator involved who, fortunately for us, was someone within sort of the wider circle of the family who knows us all, but is sort of far enough removed that they could be independent. So we had those conversations, and fortunately that meeting was scheduled about 2 weeks after the budget came out. So it all ended up really driving that conversation. So we've now got the accountants involved, and they are doing those pricing structures which you've recommended. So we're sort of just waiting to have those back and review, and then have another sit down and sort of formally agree what everyone's thinking. I think, unfortunately for us, it's looking like the outcome will likely be that the farm does get sold, just because there's it's only a small farm, 180 acres. You know, it doesn't make a lot. There's not a lot to give those who don't want to farm. Sort of some sort of equal stake. But it's still, as I say, still early days. But we are at that point. So I'm glad that we're doing the right thing.
Well done for getting the discussion going and getting everybody involved as well, because I think that sometimes there are unspoken assumptions, and that can cause problems if people aren't clear about what their intentions are. And those assumptions can be at any generational stage, you know, younger, middle, or older, because quite often you've got three. Well, in a way, you have 3 generations involved in your situation, Megan. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody. We will move on to another question. Yeah, this is not really a women in succession. It's a general succession question, but we might as well take it. We've got a fair bit of time left. So, do the panelists support a conditional IHT or CGT relief whereby farming families that have held a farm and actively farmed it for at least 10 plus years, and the next generation actively farm it for another at least 10 years, then they'd be 100% exempt, while investors or non-active farmers or those who sell up soon after death would not be, noting that care would be needed to define active farmer. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bit of a sort of kite flying. We won't spend too much time on this because it's not something that's actually, you know, being proposed. But obviously, lots of people have got different ideas about how we could do something other than what the government has said it wants to do. with the inheritance tax changes. So just very briefly, Julie and Jeanette on that.
Well, yes, I think the devil is in the detail in all of these type of situations, and we're already suffering at the moment from, we haven't had the full consultation on how exactly farming for the environment's going to be, so that's still an unknown. We're waiting for the consultation on the trust, and every time it just seems as a consultation it does take a long time. I can see that there is a merit in that, and what shouts out of that with me is this reward for being an active working farmer as opposed to a passive farmer. And I suppose that goes in line with so many tax tribunals on the difference between trading and the passive receipt of rents. I can see that they're the advantages, exactly how it will work in practice. I'll hand over to Jeanette, and she can come up with some wonderful ideas.
I think the challenge is always going to be, it makes sense, but in an income falling from pure farming situation, diversification, and indeed what Megan has been doing, is going to be more key than actually receiving money from farming. So the cases, Balfour, Dance, all those old, let's say old cases, they're not very recent. The business dynamic needs to be listened to in the industry, I think, because particularly with the cut of BPS, farming incomes, pure farming incomes are going to be, Jeremy Clarkson's words, diddly squat, compared with solar, renewables, diversification into different enterprises on a holding. And I think that will be the real challenge with bringing in a definition of what really amounts to farming. And therefore, bizarrely, you may have a workable working farmer definition, but you're almost then saying they cannot generate any other source of income. So on the one hand, it's great for inheritance tax potentially, but in real life, you've still got to run a business and you've still got to live. So I would counsel caution about going down that route. I think I would also just bring back to Megan, because Megan is key on this webinar, if you don't mind saying, Megan, because you are doing the work. And I think this is one of the things that we need to be aware of. And I draw this out in my initial meeting. There needs to be recognition that the older generation need the younger generation to generate income. And there needs to be a recognition of that in several cases, particularly where there's no pension provision for the older generation. So they need to keep on board the younger generation. I appreciate often a sale means a better return on investment if you then invest the money, but you have to look then at your inheritance tax and capital gains tax consequences. And I know we're going slightly off tangent, but I think it's worth saying on a definition or a legal definition of what amounts to working farmer, just get that into reality as well.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've got some, I'm going to go to some questions coming in during the session. This probably won't be an uncommon one for either Julie or Jeanette to be asked. How do I leave my farm just to my daughter and not her husband too? Jeanette, do you want to go first on that one?
So leave could be, the word leave could be by the will. So you could leave it by your will, absolutely, to that designated specific person, or you could leave that person with what's called a life interest and then the remainder on that person's death to somebody else. Or you could put it into a trust, which could be a discretionary trust, and basically with a letter of wishes. And this is, by the way, what most farmers are doing now, a discretionary trust will. So they effectively say, trustees, these are the guidance. I'd like you to set it up in such a way as to ensure that my daughter does have the farm, but if the wish is that the husband doesn't, actually put that in the wishes. So to give enormous flexibility to the trustees to set up appropriate legal mechanisms on a death, rather than try and think now forwards to the future. Does that make some sort of sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah, lots of options there. Julie, do you want to add to that? You're muted.
Oh, I'm muted.
You're right now.
I'm
You're
now.
okay now. Yeah.
I think you chose Jeanette correctly as the first person there, because it's really all about the legals, and Jeanette gave an excellent explanation of what those legals are. It's not that unusual a question, one which we do have to turn to the lawyers to help when the clients do ask us. It is something very much that they want them absented, and it's, I think Jeanette explained the legals of that very well. How often do you actually find that, Jeanette, in practice?
It's not that common, but it's often then leads to a discussion why. And that discussion, if we go back to that family room discussion, if it's starting in that room, at that point I would suggest, and I've normally preset this at the beginning, if anybody needs to say something that I think I need to discuss with them personally, I would ask them to go into a separate room and have a chat with them. So at that point I would try and draw out what are the real areas of concern. And it could be, and I've had so many different reasons for that given to me. It could be financial insecurity, it could be a history of mental health. Because the bottom line is, once somebody makes a will, so say, for example, the daughter receives the assets, and in the father's lifetime, the daughter has left by her own will, the assets to her children. Anybody can alter their will at any time. So that in itself needs to be a delicate discussion with the father, and possibly separately or together with the daughter, because it's better to have those discussions up front than disaster hit later. But I would ask, first of all, why?
Yeah, okay.
Normally it's because I do think this raises a very difficult question for us. It's often because the father simply hates the husband. And when we're in those discussions, and it'd be interesting to see what Jeanette's view is, and Megan, as they've done it, and they are talking openly, and say the husband isn't there, and dad will say, I only want to leave it to my daughter because I actually distrust and dislike her husband, you know. And that's often the same with regard to sons and wives, and a lot of them, they will say, and it's very difficult when you're writing up the notes, do you actually put he doesn't want to leave it to her because they hate them, or for family reasons, or what have you. I think the professional indemnity insurers, etc., would say that you've always got to put the truth down there. But I think that raises a very interesting point on how accurate you get the notes. What's your thoughts on that, Jeanette?
It is a good point, and it helps at the beginning of a meeting to say who we are acting for. So if we're acting for the partnership and everybody is in agreement, then that's absolutely fine. But details of an individual circumstance for a will would not be visible to anybody other than the individual client. So in that case, I would be totally transparent on my file note and fulsome in the reason, particularly if somebody is expressing reservations. It's not just the detail they're telling you, but it to some degree gives you an insight into their own mindsets and their own concerns. And there could be a history of different things, which then when you dig down, it all begins to make sense. And a lot of what we do, it sounds a bit sort of soft skills, but a lot of what we do is to draw out, a bit like Megan, you've experienced with mediation, it's to draw out common threads and try to look at a practical solution. I think also, just flip this around, this has often been held up in the past as a reason for women not receiving farms, because there could be a bad marriage, but that goes both ways.
Correct.
Pre-nups and post-nups are clear evidence of commercial and contractual relationships where everybody's been properly advised. So I would reassure anybody on this call who's in the past been worried about a bad marriage or a change of name or something like that. Those days are gone. We have solutions to that now, which do stand up. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Megan, just quickly, because Jeanette mentioned your mediator. How helpful was that?
It's a little hard for me to fully say. So I
okay,
I wasn't actually in the meeting. So originally I sort of hoped to be part of it. And when I first got in touch with the person who was going to mediate, it was sort of the plan. So how she did it is she met with each sort of couple individually, my parents, my auntie and uncle, and my grandparents, to get their own insight and sort of build the picture herself, and then get everyone into a room and sort of come to some sort of a next step. And then I think a week or two before, it was sort of agreed between the partners that I shouldn't be part of that conversation. And that wasn't on a sort of a gender basis. That was a generational basis. They kind of took the approach of, well, if I, a grandchild, am part of the conversation, then all the grandchildren should be. I am one of 4 grandchildren, and the only one sort of going down the agricultural route at all. So they concluded that I shouldn't be part of that conversation for that reason, which is fine. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a partner in the business at all. But I think it did definitely, from what they've said, those who were in it, it gave them focus, and I think in the nicest way possible, sort of pulled head out of the sand a little bit to actually the reality of what was happening. So it's definitely a great step. I can advise anybody, if you are struggling to have those conversations, and to find traction with them. I felt like I didn't have any traction for about a year. Bring someone in if you can. There are plenty of people legally who can do that, and it's, it's a profession. But we were fortunate there was someone within sort of the close family friendship group that could. So my advice, if you can.
Yeah. So we've heard most recently in the answer to that most recent question about some of the reasons why women may not, follow on either in terms of managing a business or owning it. Just briefly, both Julie and then Jeanette, in terms of the blocks or the assumptions, could you just list really quickly what you see as the main ones where really they don't stand up if that's the best person to run the farm? I mean, this webinar isn't an exercise in saying we must have more women farmers. It's what's best for the business and the family.
I would start with saying that I think it's often a historic or just a sort of preconceived idea of something that doesn't work, and it is a taboo that is being broken, and I'm pleased to say it's being proved throughout farming, where there are some very good lady farmers coming through. Farms do work out best, I think, often with the mix of the skills and the genders is actually very good. So I think it's normally just I think it's just historically the role of the woman has been the wife, for example, has just not been recognised. She hasn't been made a partner, for example. Historically, that's how it was. They were just not on the checkbook. That's how it was, and it is changing. It is changing. There's no doubt that it is. It does need to change some more. So over to the legal advice, Jeanette.
So, Susie, I've just come back from seeing my father, spending a great week talking all stuff farming. And I had a long discussion with him, funny enough, on this very point. And he agreed, and he's 86, that a lot of the blocks on women have historically been gender physical strength based. So at the age of 15, Megan, get this, at the age of 15, he was required to regularly lift 200 weight bags of grain. So that, a big sack of potatoes is half 100 weight, right? So 4 times that on his back at the age of 15. So there's no way when he was at the age of 15 that a woman, they didn't have gyms in those days, would be able to do that. So there's a physical aspect. The other aspect was interesting because his father was a farmer and his father's father was a farmer. So my father broke the mold, but people in their 80s still, a lot of whom own the farmland for obvious reasons, they have been brought up with just the men on the physical strength side. There's also been a legal reason, because I think it only changed relatively recently, but certainly in the 1950s, married women couldn't have their own bank accounts, and they didn't have, I think, Julie, we would call it their own separate fiscal personality. So my mother had to really fight for equality with the bank. She had to fight the bank.
As in mine, yes.
Yeah. So there are some sensible reasons. So there's history, as you rightly say, Julie. There is the nurture bit, and then there is the legal bit. And then I think that has now changed, because, I mean, certainly you look at people, physical strength isn't needed. I was talking to one woman farmer this morning, and she remembers when she really struggled to open the arms on a sprayer. Obviously, those are days before hydraulics. So the physicality of a job, not just carrying stuff on your back, it was a prerequisite that it would be male. But those days are gone. So a lot of the contractors that we employ on farms, they don't mean that the farmer actually is doing the work. So there should be no real bar, apart from mindset, if I could be that blunt, to women coming into partnerships.
Okay, thank you. Megan, just briefly to you, in terms of your contemporaries and attitudes, are you seeing change coming through in terms of who's doing what on farm?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like I'm very fortunate to be growing up in the sort of industry and society that I am, in comparison to what some of the other panelists have had. I've never had to fight to have a bank account and things like that. As you said, it's not about physical strength anymore. It's about what you do with your brain and your attitude to your work. And there are far more women who are on a much more equal keel on that front. When I was at uni, I think about a third of the people on the course were women, and I never felt any animosity about that. A cultural sort of amount, but not directly, because you're trying to be in farming. And when I said this is what I want to do, the farm is where I'm the happiest, I want to follow that career, I was never questioned. Why? You're a woman, why would you do that? So never in getting into it. There's been a few bits in sort of so far through my career, little comments and things, but never loaded. I'd say I'd describe it as, it's all just, you can just tell it's someone who's a little bit set in their ways, but the industry itself is definitely coming up to the right spot.
Okay, right, thank you. Right, we've got a specific one here. It's not gender specific, but we could read into it a gender bias. And the question is, what provisions can be made for security of non-partnership spouses who work alongside a partner? If their partner spouse passes away, then the surviving spouse, they are subject to the decisions made by the surviving partners, who can make decisions that can make a huge impact, negative impact on the surviving spouse of a partner. There's no security with regard to staying in the family home beyond the 6-month period set for the surviving partners. I presume that's something that would be set in a partnership agreement, would it?
It depends what the wording is. There's nothing under the 1890 Act, so it would come down to the contractual wording.
Yeah. So can a partner leave their partnership share to their spouse? Wouldn't that?
It's a really good question. I'll just play out the legal side, Julie, if that's all right, and then you can fill in, if that's okay, at the back. So from my point of view, you can, by your will, leave your partnership share to anybody. To the cat's home is normally, don't judge me, that's normally the example I draw. If you leave your partnership share to a non-partner, the money has to leave the partnership to that non-partner. But it doesn't mean that that non-partner or the recipient of the gift under a will of the partnership asset automatically becomes a partner.
No.
Think of a partnership like a marriage. So you can leave an asset to someone, but it doesn't mean you're automatically forced to marry them. But what it can do is, if it looks as though it's going to, say, for example, if the asset is outside the partnership and they say it's the grain store or it's the farmhouse that's key, then if the remaining partners need it, then play it into it is a partnership asset, then if they wish to keep it in the business, they would have to give the money value equivalent to the beneficiary under the will. So if you're looking at leaving a partnership undrawn drawings or current account, Julie, you would call it, wouldn't you? The current account. If you leave that, which is money due to the deceased, then that would mean that money has to be paid out according to the partnership agreement. Normally, under our ones, we have it over 10 years, just because that ties in with IHT payments, but there's nothing at law. It's just what's written in the contract. But they don't get then the ability to be a partner automatically with it, that they get the money, but they don't get the rights. But the remaining partners could decide, rather than have the departure of the money, and if they get on with that surviving spouse, they could invite the surviving spouse to become a partner. So it is all about understanding and working with people. Equally, if you cannot work with people, a partnership is about working with people. And if there isn't a meeting of minds, then there has to be a recognition of that as well.
Right.
So, Julie, what do you think?
Well, I thought that was very well put. I do think that when there was a partnership, and you said that the will is correctly that belongs to that individual, I do encourage the farming partners to explain in broad terms, not the full detail, what each of them intends to do with their partnership share on death. Because otherwise, you're in partnership with somebody that you have got no control over what actually happens. So one of the things that we would normally do and would be to follow it through and play it out. Well, this would actually happen in practice, because what actually happens in practice are very, very different, very different things. So we would normally have it so that the spouse can take on that partnership share if she wants to, and follow on. So it's all discussed in practical terms beforehand, and the full understanding of the spouse's role is understood. And I know that there's some very vulnerable partners' wives out there who are living in a house that is owned by the partnership, which a lot of women just wouldn't be able to cope with. But it's not actually like the house. So the partnership property is something that we always say we've really got to discuss this, and really understanding that what each individual wills are. And one thing that I found learned along the way to here is that the partnership agreement is actually stronger than the will.
It overrides the will.
Overrides the will, yeah. And so why then do they not have partnership agreements? We could talk about that for 2 hours without stopping. So I do think that it's all about the strength of the partnership agreement, the strength of the individual, say that to stand up to the others and say, this is what I want, this is how I want my wife protected in this situation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you can do that, just to add, and you're right, Julie, about partnership agreement overriding a will. You can have clauses, and I have done them, where you actually say the partners agree that Mrs. X, following the death of Mr. X, Mrs. X can remain in the farmhouse, and that the outgoings would be paid, etc., because that would be effectively recognising that Mr. X, effectively, it's like having part of your pension preserved after your death. I think also it's a question of looking at the other legal rights. I mean, we haven't touched on the Dependents Act 1975. So if there's inadequate provision for the surviving spouse under a will, a separate action can be brought against the estate of the deceased. We also haven't touched on effectively tenancy rights. So if somebody is an employee, so if the wife is not a partner, but she'd been employed by the partnership, PAYE basis, she may well be able to claim, if that was her primary job and if she was physically working on the farm, so not just bookkeeping, then she may be able to claim some degree of security against the freeholders. But both of those solutions are slightly gloves off and obviously involving lawyers. So I'd recommend at the outset, as Julie says, being open about the fact that wills and partnerships need to tie together. I think it's also worth adding, Julie, and you mentioned about written partnership agreements, and I did. If you haven't got a written partnership agreement, you still have a partnership. It doesn't mean you don't have a partnership agreement. It just means it's unwritten.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Right. We've got many more questions.
Oh dear.
We're going to run out of time. Just trying to find, they're coming in so quickly. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, now I've got the right box. Yeah, this is, I've lost it. Yeah, just quickly, while I'm trying to find the one I want, how often should a partnership agreement be updated? We've got a partnership with 4 people, but one has passed away, leaving 3 partners.
I'll have a go first, although it is a legal one.
Yeah, there's just a quick question at the end, which is, does it lead to a huge tax bill to update? But no.
It is, how often do you update a partnership agreement, and how often do you update a will, is very much an individual circumstance-based action, and so if there's something specific that triggers the need to update a will, and there's masses, and update a partnership agreement, those are the triggers, and it should be an action-based one rather than, hey, I mean, I know lots will say, hey, every 3 years or something, but I think it should be more actual. There is something that happens, and like one of the partners has got dementia or something like that. Those are, or they think that they look like they are becoming ill. They look like there could be capacity issues. But Jeanette, you're the lawyer. You tell us what you think is the how often they should be updated.
I don't think there's any hard and fast rules, but I think on a significant event, everything needs to be looked at. A partnership agreement is the default position if parties don't agree. So normally the ones I do record profit and loss sharing ratios. So if the 4 of us were in partnership, 25% each for income, profit and loss, I stress, then effectively if I died yesterday, then the 3 of you will be remaining, but you'll still be at 25% each. So who's got the other 25% profit and loss? So it needs to be clear as to where that is going. And it could be that everybody, for various reasons, agrees that the remaining 3 go up to 33 1/3 each. All right. At that point, I would recommend you get that recorded in writing. So sorry, Megan, about this, but if you went under a bus yesterday, then under your will, and I hope you've got a will, under your will, it would be quite clear as to what your entitlement of the profit and loss for that year would be. So just being a lawyer, I like certainty. So I would say every time there is a significant event that's permanent, look at reviewing. But remember, a partnership agreement is a creative item. It isn't something that you put in a drawer and forget about. People should, we were talking earlier about, think about housing, think about diversification, think about voting, think about property within it. If there's change of property, I'm HMRC suddenly, I'm a horrible person. I want 20 or 40% of assets. Give me some evidence why I shouldn't ask for 40%. So again, if somebody's come out of a partnership, where are those assets going? Do we need to update the documents? If somebody's coming in, exactly the same reasons.
Yes.
Thank you. Right. This is one from the Farming Community Network. On their helpline, they say they sometimes hear from women who feel their voice is not able to be heard in discussions around planning and succession, occasionally due to controlling behaviour by others in the farming family. Do the presenters have any advice for people who may find themselves in this situation? And I guess that's not necessarily women who feel they should have a place in the succession plan, but they might have opinions about other people who are not being put forward, perhaps, or not suggested. Could be either way on that.
I think it's about respecting everybody, and nobody is entitled to anything. And I think mutual respect amongst not just partners but family members is key. So if there isn't that respect, there will be difficulties. And I think I would put it as broad as that, Susie. Yeah. And I think if you work hard and show you're interested, and as I said earlier, we need the Megans of this world to keep the 80-year-olds, give them an income. And I think it's about mutual respect, people understanding where everybody fits in. Partnerships are, and this is why, Megan, you weren't involved, partnerships are private to the partners. So partnership agreements, partnership matters, partnership accounts should not be disclosed to non-partners. That's actually one of the written breaches in our partnership agreement, to share information with people who aren't partners. And I've had to have that conversation with people. But I think it's also recognising that non-partners are key. And if in fact fiscally you'd be sunk without the Megans of this world, that does need some recognition, because otherwise you are just looking at a sale then.
Yeah. Okay. Julie, did you want to?
I think it's a very good. It's a very good question. I think that there's often that they're not able to. There is a lot of control. I mean, I was sort of brought up on the idea that all farming families hate each other, which is quite a strong statement. But when producing, But when producing the legal documents, one needs a strong lawyer who will kind of work on that basis, and that's how it can be. So I think that controlling side and not being heard is not just necessarily a gender-based thing. Again, it can be within the actually operation. And I think, again, it's good drafting of a partnership agreement that makes it quite clear that the loudest, most bullying one is not the one who makes all the decisions. It's actually, it actually has to be in accordance with the agreement.
Okay, thank you. Megan, apologies, this is another one that needs legal input, so I won't bring it to you, but it is, what would the panel's advice be to best protect a daughter-in-law who's heavily involved in the day-to-day running of the farm, but without any legal interest in the land and properties owned by her in-laws, and she is not a partner in the business? I don't know. Perhaps Julie first on that one, and then Jeanette.
What would we? So if you could just go to that question again.
How best to protect a daughter-in-law who's heavily involved in the day-to-day running of the farm? She doesn't have any legal interest in the land or properties that are owned by her in-laws, and she's not a partner in the business.
My initial thoughts, again, they keep coming down to you, Jeanette, because they're all down to the legals. But my initial thoughts would be to give her an employment contract, which makes very clear what her role is, and gives her protection and power through that well-drafted employment contract. That would be a suggestion that I would have.
Okay, Jeanette.
Yeah, I think it is about documenting. Again, I would start with why. Why is that situation? If this person's key and they don't have an interest in the partnership, why? And it could be that somebody perceives them as key, but actually in reality they're not. Mostly people are key, but they just need to be, everybody needs to recognise that. So yes, a contract of employment is a good one. The Housing element, which we touched on earlier, is another one, just to look at housing rights. And I think just look at the legal situation. So to protect a daughter-in-law who is not a partner, you can't force somebody onto the other partners, but you could, interestingly, bring with the other partner's agreement, the daughter-in-law is in as a limited partner. So say, for example, you don't want the daughter-in-law to make decisions or interfere with the business, but actually you, because you're making a lot of money, you may want to share the profits across a bigger spread of partners. If you bring the daughter in as a limited partner, she could limit her own personal exposure to, say, £500, and then her exposure is eroded as soon as she interferes with the management. So it actually goes both ways. So you could limit her exposure and her management as well.
Yeah.
It could be a more tax efficient way. I'm thinking about NI, stuff like that, Julie, to bring the daughter-in-law in as a partner, but give her no voting rights, as I say. And if you bring her as a limited partner, it's implicit that her limited status is eroded as soon as she does try and interfere. And that would be contrary to the written partnership agreement as well. Limited partners, Susie, we're seeing an awful lot of partnerships now as limited partners. They were very fashionable in the 70s when we were dealing with a very similar inheritance tax position as we're looking at. And they will become much more useful for bringing generations in. Again, so normally, by the way, it's worth perhaps saying that normally a farm partnership is an unlimited partnership liability. So bringing somebody in as a limited partner ring fences their liability as well.
So can you have a general partnership that includes a limited partner, or does everything have to be limited?
You have to have at least one general partner in a limited partnership. And I would prefer to see two. And from your point of view, in terms of recommending it, it's something to be looked at each time on the individual circumstances. You can convert an unlimited to a limited. You have to add limited partnership or LP in the name. It has to be registered in any event at company's house. And it's not an onerous thing. It's more a mechanical thing.
Yeah, it sounds quite practical too. Yeah.
Yes, it's very practical, and that's we explore a lot of this dynamic within a family at the outset, because we do a lot of data collecting, in inverted commas, fact finding in those initial meetings, and then we'll put together a note of the meeting and put forward recommendations, or we may discuss those recommendations as that first meeting progresses.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Got one here. If parents refuse to discuss succession but have left the farm to two daughters equally, how is that processed upon death? I presume the question behind that is who actually gets to run the business. But there's a sort of rider to that, which is, will there be a freeze to the business? I think we probably need a little bit more background than we've got here. Is it a partnership? What provisions been made? Whether they've got lasting powers of attorney for? Well, no, that wouldn't work on death anyway.
They end on death.
Yeah. So, Jeanette, sorry, we have a break. I'll go to Julie on this one, even though it's probably a legal one. But
legal one, Jeanette's view. I mean, I think it should be made quite clear. If parents refuse to discuss succession, that's a big line anyway. And we would always, and we often are approached in those sort of situations, and it's finding good lawyers like Jeanette who will sit round with them, and they do have to discuss it, because it's important. So that very large statement there, it's got to be discussed, and they've got to be forced to do it, because it's all about how the business will continue, and that business is probably worth several million based on most farms. But have left the farm to two daughters equally. Again, whoever drafted that should have drafted it better, so that if there can be, yes, there can be joint managing partners, and they can be making the decisions. But again, that should be allowed for and provided for, and so much of this in practical terms has got to be discussed with the Jeanettes of this world to say, how can we deal with it. It might be that one of them is much more naturally the one who wants to be running the farm, or elements of it, and so I think it's a clear job description that is very will be important. And there shouldn't be a freeze on the business, provided that the positions that Jeanette said were in place. And often we encourage a separate bank account that is not part of the partnership, but it can be used to deal with the probate. And I actually did my Institute Chartered Accountant probate exams, and I would thoroughly, in 2015, I would thoroughly, just to get the head round the whole inheritance tax and how complicated farms are. I think it's very good if farm tax advisors do actually take their probate exams to understand how it works. So over to the lawyer.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. At this point, if I'm asked the question in the office, I get my notebook out and I draw circles. And I was just going to give you, I draw circles. So these are what I draw all the time, circles for people. One circle is the partnership and the other circle is the land. If you leave land to more than one person, there is ultimately a right of sale. So if the two daughters don't agree, one of them can force a sale. So just would flag that at the beginning. If you leave your partnership asset to two daughters and to two sons, to anybody, it is the bank will freeze the account if those daughters are not partners. So it's about that early discussion, because effectively, if come back to the example, the four of us were in partnership together, I pass away yesterday, the three of you will carry on. There should not be a freeze on the bank account, provided me having produced for you beforehand a written partnership agreement to which you've all signed. And then the bank won't be able to freeze the account. But if both mother and father die and the two girls inherit the parent share under the partnership and inherit the land, they are not partners at the date of death. And so one of the things we always discuss with people is two partners. You really need to have a third in the event of the awful thing happening with one person or two dying. Because at law, and this is why banks freeze it, at law, if you have two partners and one dies, at law, the business becomes a sole trader. So you think, well, how does that happen? Well, it would still be Jeanette, Megan, Julie, and Susie and co. That's our trading name. It hasn't altered. But effectively, if it's just Susie carrying on, the rest of us I've killed off, then effectively at law, it's not a partnership, but it's trading as the old partnership name. So the RPA name's there, the HMRC name is there. That won't change. That's the trading name.
Right. Thank you. Lots of food for thought. Lots of options. Yeah.
I've got a crash course on partnerships here.
Megan, got a direct question for you. Don't answer it if you don't want to, because it's personal. But the question is, what's your plan for your farming future if the family farm is sold? What alternatives would you consider? And the questioner acknowledges it's a tough position to be in.
Yes,
How do you feel about,
it does feel a little bit that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've maintained my sort of full speed ahead approach on my career. So I do still work full time and everything. And if there were to be any changes in that, it would be decided on if the farm stays within the family or not. If it's sold, the likelihood is that I will see some share of that sort of from my parents, from their amount they sort of would like to be able to provide for I've got one older brother. So I think there's potential of looking to try and purchase a small bit of land, if possible. That is something that we could just set up our own little thing, likely with me being sort of the lead on it. I would need that to stay close to my work. The likelihood of being able to purchase something in the south on half what this current farm is probably worth is of any note along the farming, to be actually practically farming is probably quite slim. So the likelihood is that my touch to physical and practical farming will probably be lost. I've still got my career within it, and that brings me into it. I will be fortunate enough, likely, a life with little to no mortgage, which is very nice, but the actual connection to physical farming will probably be lost, which is a tough realization to sort of be coming to at the minute.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know yet, but that's probably the likelihood. Focusing on my career, go and make a name for myself in that department, and try and find somewhere nice to live, but let go of the farming side of it.
Well, all the best with all of it, and hopefully one way or another you won't have to let go of the farming side. Just a really quick one. Any recommended resources for non-family succession options or examples for non-family succession? So I guess, Julie, you've probably come across lots of situations where there may be family who are there, but they just don't want to run the farm. So
yes.
Yeah.
And it's and so often it is so it's any recommended resources for non-family succession options,
or options or examples of what.
I mean, it just generally does come down to the selling of it. That is that would be the point on that. We often do. I mean, we would come across them all the time. I do think that succession is a really big thing. I think it's really good that Farmers Weekly, it's impossible to, you open Farmers Weekly every week and there is something, which is pretty amazing because it didn't used to always be like that. And it is good that the farmers are understanding it, but it would be the lawyer again who I think would come up with what would your advice be, Jeanette?
So I think there are lots of different things you can do. I think it's a question of expectations. So if you're looking at a sale, do you want to keep an interest in the land? Do you want to do some sort of lease back? If you're looking at a sale with development, look at overage on a sale. There isn't one size fits all, Susie, to be honest. There's no one farm that looks the same as 10 others, I'm afraid. There isn't yet one family that is replicated by others. And every single case is different. So non-farming family solutions are enormous. It's a question of what people want out of it. It's a question of starting that discussion.
I mean, the question refers to non-family succession options or examples. So immediately contract farming, letting it, and share farming came to mind. Give Megan a share farming agreement.
Yeah, I mean, you could do those. The question is capital, perhaps for Megan. It's raising capital to work the property. So these would be people who are not farming, you're saying, Susie, or who
my reading is
who aren't farming.
Have a farm, but there aren't any. I have a farm which, from the very brief question, I think they want to continue, but they don't have family to succeed in managing it or running it. So what are their options for keeping it as a farming business?
So yes, contract farming would be a clear thing. Take tax advice at an early stage on that, though, because what people loosely call share farming and contract farming and tenancies is significantly different fiscally and risk taking as well. So do take professional advice, and it's paid back in dividends on the inheritance tax side and capital gains tax side. So if people haven't got successors but they want to carry on owning the land, is that the gist of it, do you reckon?
Yeah, I think so, but I've just spotted that it's 6:15 and I'm really sorry. We've had so many questions. Just want to thank everybody really quickly, both on the panel and for attending the webinar. It will be available to view online. I'm really sorry we didn't have Victoria, because I know she would have added a lot to it. But thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you, Susie. I'm sorry that there were so many questions and not enough time.
I'm pleased there were lots of questions. It shows engagement.
Yeah. I'm sorry to those who've asked a question that we didn't manage to get to. Thank you, everybody.